The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Okay, welcome to a special edition of the Retro Rangers podcast. It's a special edition because we probably won't be talking about the Rangers. We're going to be talking about the New York Times recent choice to close down their sports department and get their content from the Athletic, which they bought a while ago. And here to share their thoughts about that are two legendary sports writers. We have Gerry Eskenazi, formerly of the New York Times, and Bock, formerly of the Associated Press. Okay, gentlemen, thanks for coming.
Sure. Happy to be with you.
Okay. When the Times announced that they were going to be closing down their sports department, they said it was an evolution of how we cover sports. What do you guys think about that?
You want my opinion? I'll give you my opinion.
Anybody.
You cover sports by printing standings and box scores, which they dropped a long time ago. You cover sports by covering the home teams, the Mets, the Yanks, the Rangers, the Devils, the Islanders, the Giants, the Jets. That's how you cover sports here in New York. You don't cover sports by covering soccer. And, I mean, today's New York Times, they still have a sports section until September. And today's sports section was all about the Women's World Cup, soccer. And they have been, it seems to me, obsessed with soccer coverage in the last few years. Why? I don't know. Soccer is not a big-time sport here in New York. But one thing that really amused me, and it's something that I noticed, the day before they announced that they were doing away with their sports section, two of the stories in the sports section that day, one was on cricket and the other was on Australian rules football. And I'm thinking to myself, how many readers of the New York Times care about those two activities? There was nothing about the Mets or the Yankees that day. So I don't understand the perspective that they brought to their coverage. Maybe Gerry can shine a light on that.
Well, believe it or not, Hal, you are not the first person who I've heard say this. And in fact, in the last year or so, I've been hearing it so often that I actually got in touch with the sports editor, who is no longer the sports editor, by the way. And I said to him, what happened to the coverage of, Yanks and Mets and what's with all this coverage of teams overseas or in distant states? And he replied that more than half the readers of the New York Times are not New Yorkers. Because when you say the New York Times now, you're not talking just the print edition, just the paper. It is online. And more than half the readers aren't New Yorkers. Well, that said, I still don't understand what sort of algorithms they're using, what sort of mathematical formulas they're using that people are more interested in Women's World Cup, than other mainstream sports. It still is become very, very strange to me. I don't get it. And you know what? I saw your questions, George, before we started, and I don't know that I have a good answer, and I don't think that anyone in the sports department can. There has to be a specific answer of why the New York Times is abandoning sports as we know it.
Right.
But I don't know what the answer is, other than the fact that they have some formula that they have figured out that that readers don't care about what readers care about.
The irony here, Gerry. One of their staff writers, and they don't have much of a staff, I don't think, anymore, but one of their staff writers, Tyler Kepner, he's one of the best baseball writers in America. Now,
right.
what's he going to do for a living? Is he going to go move on the national desk? What's the point of that? That's a wasted talent. I mean, he'll have to leave. In my opinion, if I were him, I'd call the New York Post or the Daily News or some other newspaper and see if I could hook on, because he's a baseball writer. A baseball writer without a sports section makes no sense to me.
Yeah, well, you're right about Tyler, Hal. And then there were several other writers also that, every paper has really good writers. And what I can't figure out is the people themselves are sort of at sea. No one seems to have seen it coming. Although it is interesting that the sports editor left about 3 months ago. And no one really seems to know what the Times has in mind. They're not even sure that the Times is going to have a sports section per se, or will they sort of divide the stories up into various departments. So I wonder, for example, if they're going to have if the Yankees, for example, change their uniform, is that going to be in the fashion section? By the way, I'm not even sure that we have a fashion section anymore.
Very good.
And yet, fellas, the Times stock is at an all-time high. The paper is doing fantastically. Does this mean that people who read the New York Times don't give a damn about sports? I mean, I can't believe that.
That's just too far, a bridge too far for me. To me, a newspaper, when I worked at the Associated Press, each day we went to work with the theory that we would give our member newspapers all of the material they need on that given day to put out a newspaper. We would give them national news, we would give them foreign news, we would give them local news, we would give them state news, we would give them sports news, we would give them everything they needed. They could pick and choose what they wanted to put in their newspaper, but we would provide it to them. That was part of the service that we provided. And to me, a complete newspaper includes a sports section. Now, I know that I'm a sports junkie, and I know that, Gerry, you're a sports junkie. I understand that. But the idea of having a paper without a sports section, it just it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
I just can't imagine that. Okay, have the reading habits of sports fans changed that much over the years that they don't want to read about their teams in the paper anymore?
I don't believe that for a moment.
I think with social media and with television coverage and with the internet, people are more interested than ever in reading about their team. Even though, they say that, well, before they go to bed, they know the result. Well, yeah, but that's been true since radio. So I think that a well-written story, if you're a sports fan, you still want to read about what you saw.
Right. No.
Plus, in my mind, sports writers give you more than just the score of the game. They give you a little look behind the scenes. What do the players think? What do they say? I mean, the sports writer can take the reader a place that he can't go without the sports writer. And now they won't have that option anymore. They're just, they can find out the score, and that's about it,
Yeah.
That's true. I know that for example, at the New York Times, which was called a morning paper, and I'm sure you probably had to do it at the AP also, Hal, especially for big games. You'd almost write 3 stories about an event. You'd write we had something on early edition that we would write pertaining to the game, obviously not the game itself, and then we would have a running story as the game was going along. And then finally we would have a third story once the game is over, and we'd go to the locker room and get quotes. These are all things that bring, plus there's the expertise of the writer himself. and he's not beholden to anyone, unlike, say, some of the TV announcers, who maybe gloss over some ludicrous play or something like that, or some absurd action by a player. The writers are under no obligation like that. They have the obligation to be completely honest, and for the most part, they are.
Well, that started after the war, after World War II. Dick Young was a trailblazer in that respect because he went to the locker room, and it was outrageous. Nobody went to the locker room. What were you going to the locker room for? Because I want to know what the players think. And he went to the locker room, and he trailblazed coverage in the locker room. And it was important. You can either be a fan or not a fan of Dick Young. He was who he was. But the idea was he was going to give the players' point of view to the reader. And that was a big, big deal because the reader didn't have that option until Dick Young.
Yeah, good point, Hal. It's interesting to go back to, if you read stories from the 30s and the 40s, you'll read a game story and it'll be 900 words of who did what when. And you won't see one quote, believe it or not, you will not see one quote by the manager or a player about the game itself.
That's right. Yeah. And
that's the kind of thing, I believe, that's the kind of thing that readers and sports fans want. Because it gets you take the reader someplace he can't go, he's going to be very appreciative of that. So that's, in my mind, that's one of the advantages that sports writers bring to the table. And somehow it doesn't seem to matter to the New York Times.
No. The writers for the Times over the years, they've had some great writers. Arthur Daly, Red Smith, Dave Anderson, George Vesey, Gerry Eskenazi, William C. Roden. I mean, all these guys made their names for themselves with the New York Times, and it's a shame that no other sports writer from now on is going to be able to do that.
What I'm curious about is the philosophy that caused them to make a U-turn like that and decide not to cover New York teams. I don't get it. I understand they view themselves as a national paper, and that's fine. The Washington Post is the same, so is the LA Times. That's fine. But I think you have an obligation, if it says New York on your masthead, to cover New York teams.
I mean, the New York Times is not going to stop covering Albany or New York City. They're not going to stop covering Mayor Adams. And as you say it, Hal, it's New York City. So how could you not cover something that 50,000 people go to see an event, and another 100,000 are talking about it the next day, and maybe 1 million people saw it on television. So, if anyone listening to this thinks that we don't understand what's going on, well, they're absolutely right. It seems incredulous to us.
Well, you know what? The handwriting was. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. I guess I don't know. When they bought the Athletic for several $1 million, and they started to give the Athletic to subscribers for free, and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. I subscribe 7 days a week to the Times because my wife likes to do the crossword puzzle. But fine, now I'm getting the Athletic online for free, right? So now every day I would read the Athletic, and it was fun. They had some good stuff in there. And then one day, maybe a month ago, maybe less, I would be reading a story, and suddenly the story stops, and an ad comes up. You want to continue reading the story, you got to pay 50 cents a day or 50 cents a week or 50 cents a month. I don't know what it was. And I was offended by that. I said, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get it for free. Why am I not getting it for free anymore? So I don't know what's going on with those people, but they obviously are, pulling a fast one on me, and I'm not playing a game with them. So I'll get my sports news. I'm very grateful here on the island for Newsday. and I subscribe to Newsday because they have a full sports section. They have standings. They have box scores. They have everything I want to know. And by the way, I want to know, So in the morning at breakfast, I have a sports section to read. And it doesn't have any soccer in it, by the way. And today it had World Cup, but other than that, Bob Lipside, a former colleague of yours, Gerry, commented on their soccer coverage that the Times has adopted soccer, or until now, had adopted soccer as their main sport, and every day you would see soccer stories in the sports section. And I wondered about that. I don't have to read it. I'm not interested. I don't read it. But I wondered about that. Why are they putting so much soccer in the paper? I don't have an answer for that. Now that there's no soccer in the paper, there's no sports section.
Yeah. How about a trend? Is this something that you see happening in other cities around the country, other newspapers?
Well, yes. Actually,
ahead,
several major papers have cut down from 7 days a week to just 3 or 4 or 5 days. I don't recall the names of them, but I believe that the New Orleans Times-Picayune is one of them. That instead of printing, you'll have to get a couple days a week. You'll have to get it online. And there's some other major papers that are going along in that same path. But sports isn't the only section that the New York Times has cut back. We used to have a Metro section that was New York City news. There is not a section for New York City news in the New York Times.
Wow.
Can somebody explain what's going on to me? I studied journalism a long time ago, and I practiced journalism for 40 years, and I don't understand what's going on. How can you have a New York paper without a New York City section? New York City news.
Yeah. As far as the rest of the country is concerned, I'm just wondering if they are going to follow the lead of the Times. Because I would say when all is said and done, and even though I worked for them for more than 40 years, I'm saying it, without showing off, that it's the most important paper in the United States. I'm just wondering whether or not other papers will say, hey, look what the New York Times has done, and they're making money.
Well, I can tell you, my understanding is that the Los Angeles Times is following suit in terms of its sports coverage, in that it's publishing now more of a magazine-type sports section rather than the daily nuts and bolts sports section that we're accustomed to. So maybe it's a trend. I don't know.
Yeah. It's become sort of very feature-oriented as opposed to hard news-oriented.
Okay, well, the Times always said that it was all the news that was fit to print. So I guess that the New York City section and the sports section is not fit to print anymore for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well,
as Gerry said, they view themselves as a national paper, and I understand that.
Yeah.
USA Today is a national paper, but they have a sports section, right?
Sure.
Sure. You got to have a sports section. These are activities that are going on that people are fascinated by. As Gerry mentioned before, 50,000 people yesterday at Yankee Stadium. I think they had a crowd of about 45,000 people. That's a lot of people in one place at one time.
Yeah.
Those people are interested. You got to be able to furnish coverage for people who are interested, and they don't seem to care.
How about if they had when people are reading online, if they had a place they could click for local Times coverage, would that be out of the realm of something the Times could do, or would be willing to do, or is that something that just wouldn't happen because of the cutbacks and everything?
For me, and I know I'm a dinosaur, I understand that, but for me, reading a newspaper means turning pages.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
reading it online is not the same. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. I know that the millennials read their paper on a telephone. Well, the telephone screen is a little tiny thing. I like to have the paper spread out in front of me, and I can look on the page and be interested in that story and maybe not in this story, and turn the page. I enjoy that. That's part of my enjoyment. And I'll always be a print guy, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of having something in front of you, and speaking as your fellow dinosaur, the idea that your eye can fall on a story in a newspaper, it's sort of fun. Hey, look at this. I didn't know this, Or we used to have little fillers, which they don't have anymore, for space fillers. But you can't on a screen. You can't on a screen that's 5 by 7 inches or 2 by 3 inches have the same impact in holding something in your hand and seeing something in stark black and white, with a headline. The headline, which is probably larger than the screen itself,
Yep, that's
larger
right.
than your phone. That's the sort of thing that makes newspaper reading fun, I think. A part of it, and it's part of the thing that makes newspaper reading fun.
Right.
Plus, turning the page.
Yeah. Well, it all depends on what people grew up with. We grew up with a physical newspaper, and we turned pages. And the people nowadays are used to reading it on their screens. And there are benefits from having a physical newspaper too. If you have a dog or a pet, or if you want to wrap something up,
I was talking to a friend the other day. When I graduated from college and went into this business, there were 7 daily newspapers in New York City. Yeah. And then there were the suburban papers. There were a couple of Long Island papers. There was Newsday. There were Westchester papers. All these papers have gone away. We have now, here in New York City, we have 3 daily newspapers for a city of 9 million people. I mean, It just boggles my mind that the industry has shrunk to the point where we have, and this has been the case for quite some time, merely 3 newspapers in a town that once had 7 of them. It's just, I don't know. It's frightening to me.
Yeah, well, you also have morning and afternoon papers too. So
that's right.
That's a different thing too. Now everything comes out in the morning, and if you want an update, it's online. But if the actual physical paper is a morning paper now. So
when I was a kid, my dad brought home the Daily News, and in the evening after 5 o'clock, I would go to the newspaper stand or the candy store and get both the Journal American and the World Telegram and Sun. So we had 3 newspapers in my house to read, and it was fun, frankly. I enjoyed reading the newspaper.
Yeah. Each one had their own view of things, their own slant, and different writers wrote different ways, and you were exposed to different philosophies. It was different. It was fun.
And by the way, besides those 3 newspapers in school, and Gerry, you'll be pleased to hear this, we had a subscription to the New York Times. Every morning we would get the New York Times in class as part of our education. So really, I was reading 4 newspapers a day, not 3.
Yeah. When I was in high school, the only newspaper we could read in school was the Times. If you came in with the news or the Post, they would take it away from you. You could only read the Times.
That was part of the curriculum. Yeah.
Well, as you both know, that every new invention has some side effects that people don't expect, or their initial thing is, hey, it's not going to work. When computers first started, we experimented with about 6 different computers. And one day in the 1970s, believe it or not, they gave me this computer with a screen of about 3 inches. And they sent me to Yankee Stadium with the techie from the company. And it was a very boring game. It was a boring Yankee game. but the computer had a game. Had a game. I think it might have been called Ghost or something like that. A very rudimentary game, like for 8-year-olds. So I was playing it, and the guy said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm playing a game." He says, "We don't play games on computers." So, so you can't figure. I remember also when they came in, and I used to write a lot of obituaries and advance obituaries, and I used to love rummaging through the papers. We had what we call the morgue, and you would rummage through it and look for facts, and you would find an odd fact here and an odd fact there. And then when the computer came in, I said to myself, well, how am I going to find these facts? Because I was used to just rummaging through and finding the odd facts. And now, of course, I can't imagine writing a story without a computer. So, yeah, it takes time to get used to new things. But this is still a little bit different from something new. This is doing away with something that's not only old, but it's also contemporary. In other words, there's nothing outmoded about a game story. There's nothing outmoded about sports per se. So that's what throws me with this.
Yeah. All right. Do you think the Times is going to lose any sports fans over this?
I don't know. I've heard the odd person say that, but I don't think so. I don't think anyone subscribes to the New York Times strictly for its sports section.
Exactly. I think you're 100% right, Gerry.
There are people that subscribe to the Post for its sports section.
Yes, that's true.
Well,
that's true.
20% of the paper is sports, and pretty good sports also. But I don't think they're going to lose subscriptions over this. I don't know what you fellas think, but that's my opinion.
I agree. I agree 100% with Gerry. But you know what I'm curious about? They now have blank pages. What are they going to use on those pages? What are they going to put on those pages? If there's no sports section, they're still going to have the same size paper, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you don't have to have the same amount of pages every day, do you? I don't know how that.
No, but I don't know. I don't know how the mechanical part of this business works, but it just seems to me that you're making me pay for a subscription and giving me less product.
Yeah. Any idea has the cost of newsprint gone up at all lately? Maybe they're just trying to save some money that way.
Well, Gerry just said the stock is soaring, so I mean I don't think you have to make a benefit for them,
Yeah, that's true. What about union concerns? Do you see any problems with?
My son, the labor lawyer, told me the other day that the newspaper guild had filed a grievance against the Times over this. So I don't know if that's true or what the deal is on that.
Yeah, the Times is a guild, a newspaper guild or newspaper union paper. Now you'd have a section, a complete section or stories routinely written by non-union people. Now they could say, from what I understand, they can claim that they're third-party people. In other words, people that they hire just for the day or something like that. But obviously, that's not the case of them being just interim hirees. They be part of the Athletic itself is will be part and parcel of the New York Times. So where this goes with union, it's an iffy kind of situation.
Yeah.
I know I often see mysterious bylines in the paper, so I mean, I don't know who those people are, but I'm sure they're not staff,
All right. Can the Times sell their content now to other newspapers around the country through the Athletic?
I don't know.
Well, they own the Athletic. They paid $500 million for the Athletic, so they can, it's completely theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. And the Times has its own news service, just like it wasn't as large as Associated Press, but yeah, they could sell I think that probably what happens is rather than selling individual stories, you subscribe to the New York Times news service, and you would get that as part of the service. I'm speculating if that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
What's the purpose? What was the purpose of buying The Athletic, other than folding the sports section in the regular paper? $500 million. You could use it for other things, you know.
Yeah. We could have had a swimming pool or something like that.
Something like that.
A spa. Any idea what this is going to do to the future of sports writing? Will people want to get into sports writing anymore, or can you see that it might not be as popular as it is now?
Well, you wonder whether or not the Times having the impact that it does. Our other papers, well, as Hal mentioned, the L.A. Times, but I wonder whether or not other papers are going to follow suit because this is the New York Times, or whether or not people are going to get used to not seeing these, not seeing the box scores, not seeing the post-game stories, not even reading, speculation about, who's going to be traded. So, all of this is really unknown at this time, I think. It reminds me of something I saw recently, that when printing or when book writing came into vogue, the ancient Greek philosophers were very upset because they said, look what will happen to memory. People aren't going to remember stories anymore. They'll read about it. Like as if that was a bad thing. So I think that, any innovation really takes time to settle down and to figure out where it's going. But while, some papers may be attracted by the fact that, hey, maybe you don't need a sports section, I still think the readers out there will determine what the papers want and what the papers need to do.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that they fold the sports section, but I still get a you mentioned it before, Styles, I think it's called, the Styles section.
Yeah.
That I never look at, that I'm not interested in. I still get a business section, which is obviously you need to have a business section, I guess. I still get a food section on Wednesday, which is interesting to look at. I still get an arts and leisure section every day, which has the crossword puzzle in it. So, I mean, are these sections any more vital or less vital than a sports section?
Yeah.
I don't
know. When you talk about the living section and that like that, I remember, I guess it was in the 80s when they had their Sports Monday section, and that was great. I mean, the whole piece of the Times was all about sports, and it was very very handy to have.
Well, they still do. They still have a Sports Monday section.
Oh, okay.
Well, I noticed that on Sunday they folded the sports section into the main section. This goes back a while, and why they would do that, I don't know, but they did.
Yeah.
I don't understand the thinking. Nobody consults me about the thinking on these decisions,
Yeah. I used to say that about the Rangers. I've been watching these guys for more than 50, 60 years, and they have yet to call me up and ask me what they should do. So,
Gerry, you said the sports editor left 3 months ago. Who's running the section?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there is a sports editor per se. So, in fact, just before we went on, I emailed someone to ask who the sports editor is. I haven't heard back. So we'll see. Unless maybe this person was fired that I emailed. I don't know.
No.
We shall see. It's
strange things are happening.
Yeah. And no one I've spoken to seems to have an answer. Although you said, Hal, that you think it's by September rather. Is that what you've heard? That the section
I've heard that the sports section will continue until September. Mm-hmm. So who knows? Anything's possible.
Well, here's the thing. the people in sports may be continuing there till September, but it doesn't mean the section itself will be dissipated. In other words, it's possible that it could be filled with the athletic stories. I just can't imagine that the paper will not have a section called sports, where it'll say, where you look in the index for sports, because you don't know what the individual stories are, so you have to ask for sports. Well,
but they want me to buy the Athletic. They want me to spend extra money to buy the Athletic to get my sports news. I'm not prepared to do that. I'll get my sports news from Newsday.
Well, that's like asking to plug an extra quarter if you want to read the science section, right? Or something like that.
That's right. That's another section that they have that they deliver each week. So, I mean, they've found room for all of these other sections, and they couldn't find room for a sports section?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess it's important to them.
I really had a funny feeling. I almost had a feeling of betrayal. I mean, it's a paper I love. I've written a story for the New York Times sports section every year since 1960. I've had a byline. And even since I retired 23 years ago, I've still had a story, at least one or two stories in every year. Usually now they're about people who have retired or passed away. But, it's still something that's important to me, and I still feel part of it. And it was like someone punched me in the gut when I read about this.
I can imagine it would feel that way.
It's a shame. That is nothing we can do about it. They're going to do what they want to do, whether it's right or not, whether it makes people happy or not. So.
Well, despite all the controversy, there hasn't been any talk about them changing their mind. So they're going to.
I don't think they've changed it. I think once they make a decision like that, that's carved in stone.
Yeah, they would.
I don't think there's any chance of them retreating.
Yeah.
No, I think they're doing what they're going to do what they're going to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Okay. You guys have any closing remarks?
Other than I'm saddened by this. I'm saddened by anything that reduces exposure of sports to the readers, and it's unfortunate. And once again, the decision makers make the decisions, and I just go along and follow the decisions. And I'm not happy with it, but and I'm sure Gerry isn't either. But it's a sad day, frankly, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though I don't know the names of any of the people I see writing for the paper now, it's still it's still a part of who I was for all those years, and it was a lot of pride in working for a great organization, and saying, hey, I worked for the New York Times. A lot of people used to say it was our second name, and in fact, a certain real estate big shot in New York used to call me for advice when he was dabbling in sports. So, it was a great feeling to be. And now I don't know that that Mr. Trump is going to call me anymore. So I don't know.
Well, he's got other business to transact.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, as far as your sense of pride, Gerry, I know every time I ever interviewed you, you never said the Times. You always called the New York Times. Every time you always called the New York Times.
With a capital T.
I could always tell there's a lot of pride there, and
Hey, Gerry, you might remember this. Gerry, you might remember this. Was there a time when the masthead on the front page, the flag, not the masthead, the flag on the front page carried a period after the word Times?
Yes.
It was.
Until about 1980, then John Radasta, do you remember him, Hal? Remember the name? John Radasta, who was a golfing writer, said, "Hey, why do we have a period after the New York Times?" He said it's sort of outmoded. So not only did they decide to do away with it, they did a study and showed that it would save $18 a year in type.
what it's all about.
Doing away
All
with
the
the
money.
period.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny that you mention it, Hal, because I was just thinking about that today. If it was worth writing about, that yes, it used to be a the New York Times period.
It's just something that occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. I said, didn't they used to have a period here? Well,
also,
no more.
it used to be hyphenated. There used to be the New York Times till, I guess, around the 1880s or 1890s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slowly but surely, they're doing away with all of the parts of the paper.
Yeah, right.
First the period goes, now the sports section's going.
Yeah. What's next?
Going to take away all the news that's fit to print.
That's right.
Logo.
The motto, yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you very much for coming on. You did a great job, and I hope somehow all this comes to light and we find out why this happened. But I wouldn't count on it. So thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Loved reminiscing. Good night, fellas.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.